Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we're talking about a couple of different things here. First and foremost, Joe Berger, the longtime Minnesota Vikings guard, center, interior offensive lineman, is officially retiring, so that's a big loss. We'll talk a little bit about that. After that, we'll jump into kind of something that we're kind of working on through for the offseason here. Is just kind of a discussion topic. And so today's is going to be keeping players in a Vikings uniform forever. I've talked about this with a couple of different people on Twitter. It seems to be kind of an issue for Vikings fans in general, just talking about, the fact that it is a business and that it's not possible to keep everyone in a Vikings uniform. So you're going to have to sort of roll with the punches a little bit. The biggest discussion that I've seen is with Barr, Kendricks, Hunter, and Diggs. So those are probably the four candidates that we'll be talking about the most here in that discussion. And then we'll finish up with maybe a little bit on Jeremiah Sirles and Jarius Wright being in Carolina. Carolina becoming kind of the Minnesota Vikings East as opposed to the Seattle Seahawks being the Minnesota Vikings West. So we'll talk a little bit about that possibly, and then we'll jump into questions as we always do. So let's jump right into it here with some discussion on Joe Berger. Like I said at the top of the show, he's retiring. His career is officially over. He did a lot for the Minnesota Vikings during his tenure. He became one of the best centers in the league, according to Pro Football Focus 2 years ago. Then he moved over to guard now with Pat Elflein taking over in center last year as a rookie. So what are your thoughts on losing Joe Berger, and kind of what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge loss for the Minnesota Vikings offensive line. He's kind of, at least the last couple of years, he's been sort of the leader of that group as they've kind of brought in some newer, younger guys in there. He's at least been the most stable of the position, as the position has gone up through a bunch of change the last couple of years. Not a lot of stability there, but he's been kind of the one guy you could count on all this time. He's had, he started 16 games 2015, 14 games in 2016, and then 16 games last year. That's pretty tough to do in the NFL, and in 3 years in a row like that, is start 46 games the way he did in the regular season. You don't come across that very often. So just by that, he deserves a lot of respect. And then obviously he, especially in 2015, I thought was kind of his coming out party, which is kind of a weird thing to say about a guy who's been in the league since 2006, I think. But yeah. He really sort of came out of the scene there as one of the most reliable interior offensive linemen in the NFL, really. And so the Vikings were lucky to have him as they kind of bring in this new era of younger offensive linemen here with Nick Easton, Pat Elflein, probably going to draft a guy here coming in soon. Yeah. So I think he brought in some good stability there, and a transitional period that the Vikings didn't really have any stability, and they really needed somebody there that they could rely on, at least one starter, and Joe Berger was that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at the situation for the Vikings right now, and kind of the number one consequence of this is that it seems like the Vikings are going to absolutely have to draft a guard or an interior offensive lineman or something like that early in the first or second round, potentially even day 3. I guess I should put it like this: the Vikings are going to have to draft a guard or a center on day 1 or day 2 of the draft. So sometime in those first 3 rounds. That's the major consequence here for losing Berger. That's something that we'll talk a little bit more when we get into the questions, and I guess as we get further and further into the draft. I saw a Purple Post put up today on Twitter that we are officially 1 month away from draft day. How about that, right? So
it's moving fast.
It is moving fast. So it definitely is. It's definitely a tough loss to lose Berger. This is a guy that was a mauling run blocker. He got out in front of his guys. He got his hands up on the chest. He was the most consistent offensive lineman before Riley Reif came, for sure. And then he kind of added to that stability, playing multiple different positions. And that's invaluable to a team. When you have the opportunity to have a guy that can play 2 different positions in the interior offensive line, if not 3. Did Berger play left guard as well?
Yeah, he moved, I think, in 2016 when the Vikings were, I think Alex Boone missed a game here or there, and I think he went over to left guard for a game. So something like that. But either way, having a guy that can play 3 positions and play very well in all 3 roles is rare.
He can essentially start at all 3 positions. So that's the biggest loss here in my mind, is that you lose a guy that from my understanding, was a very good locker room guy as well. If you watch like 96 Questions or anything like that on Vikings.com, there's only good things said about Joe Berger. Seems like a very quiet guy, kind of a guy that keeps to himself a little bit, but then he goes out there and he has that mean streak. I guess that's a term that is used often with offensive linemen, is where you can be these cuddly teddy bears off the field, but when you get on the field, you need to have that mean streak, that wicked streak, or whatever it is that you need to do to kind of get yourself prepared. And that's something that I've seen from Joe Berger right from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so rare to have a guy that can have that mentality and then perform well at three positions like that. And I think that's kind of how the Vikings were introduced to this whole mindset of finding offensive linemen that can play multiple positions. Joe Berger seemed to introduce that to this front office, and now they've kind of taken that and run with it. Nick Easton's another guy that can play center or guard. Pat Elflein, obviously. They've talked extensively about trying to get guys that can play, whether it's playing both sides at tackle, whether it's Mike Remmers playing tackle and guard. They have this thing now where they're trying to get guys that can play multiple positions, and Joe Berger was maybe the cornerstone for that mindset. So again, you have to appreciate what Joe Berger brought to this team. It's just in that aspect. Even if he wasn't a, Pro Bowl level player, even though I think he was, but even if he wasn't that, he was just an average starter. That alone deserves appreciation. But now you have, obviously, the accolades he earned and the performance he had on the field was well above average. So yeah, he definitely deserves a lot of appreciation from the fans, I think, after his career here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that just comes back to the whole versatility talk. That's something we've talked about quite a bit. Between continuity and versatility, there's got to be some sort of happy medium there. And those are two words that we kind of use maybe too much. But the continuity thing is that Joe Berger was always prepared. He was always ready to get in there and play guard or center, whichever one it was. And his advanced statistics, I suppose, the Pro Football Focus numbers, the Football Outsiders numbers, those types of figures that kind of judge performance based off of offensive line play, which is very difficult to do because there aren't any raw statistics other than pancakes as far as I know. And, I mean, who really even tracks? Does anyone track pancakes anymore? Is that like pancake blocks?
Remember on like Madden 07, but I don't know if that's still a thing anymore, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, what it comes down to is the Vikings just lost a guy that was very consistent in a lot of different ways and added that continuity aspect to the offensive line. Because as we've said before, ultimately what it comes down to is you're trying to get the 5 best guys out there. It doesn't matter who those 5 guys are or which position they're playing. I'm sure that, each of these guys kind of has like, for example, I think that Mike Remmers probably believes that he's a right tackle. Like, that's my understanding from what I've gotten from him through his press conferences, through his play, through any time we've basically seen him come up in the media. It gives me the impression that Mike Remmers believes that he's a right tackle. Now, is he willing to play right guard? Clearly, because he did that. And now it looks like that he's going to be considering playing that moving forward as well. So it's difficult. It's a difficult situation for like Remmers and I guess for Berger as well. But ultimately, you're trying to get the 5 best guys out there, and whoever those 5 are, I don't know. I mean, Riley Reif is going to be the left tackle. That's about all that I know. Oh, well, and Pat Elflein is going to be the center. So those are the 2 things that I know for sure at this point. Or I guess I shouldn't say that I know, but I feel very confident in those 2. In those 2 positions not moving. But other than that, that means you got left guard wide open now. You've got right guard probably going to be Remmers, it sounds like. Right tackle could be Rashad Hill. There's going to be some changes here, and it's probably going to come via the draft. And that's something that we'll be talking about more and more as April starts to get closer and closer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just the biggest thing. I guess the biggest pro that Berger brought to the table is just the way to adapt to injuries, adapt to players, maybe weakness or bad performance or what have you, and trying to figure out the continuity, trying to find guys that can work together, but also trying to find ways to adapt to new situations. Right. When guys struggle or maybe a guy performs really well at a certain position, Berger made it possible to adapt to that. So now the Vikings have to do that again, and they have to find a guy like Berger to if we have another right guard that they want to draft, let's say, then you can move you could move Elflein back out to right guard. You can move him to center. You could add in Billy Price, and you can play 3 positions. I mean, you have Berger's kind of set the table for that type of attitude towards drafting offensive linemen. Is you don't want a guy that can just play one position. We've seen that kind of fall through before in the past with the Vikings, and I think Berger's kind of bringing that new attitude. So that's what I value most about Berger's stint with the Vikings. Obviously, on the field, he was terrific. We know that, but I just think that now the Vikings are going to move forward here. And I think Spielman, Tony Sperano, Rob Brzezinski are going to find guys that can play multiple positions, and it's going to change the way that the Vikings move forward, and it's going to, I think, help in the long run having guys that can adapt to different situations.
Yeah, and then you can make this universal if you want. I don't know how accurate this is, but for teams that are trying to copy the Minnesota Vikings right now, kind of copy their model for success after last season, you can make a case that, no pun intended, that
every time
you can make a case that Berger kind of changed the game as a whole, because he was, for teams that are looking at Joe Berger's situation and looking at a guy that played multiple positions in the interior and then are, in theory, by proxy, trying to find other guys that can come in and do the same thing for their system. I mean, you can make an argument that he did the way that he went about the game was revolutionary to a degree. I don't want to blow this up and make it over dramatic, but to a degree, what he was able to accomplish in the way that he went about this play changed kind of the dynamic of the NFL to a degree, because it allowed
the Vikings to go after any interior lineman they wanted last year, instead of just getting, okay, we want a guard only, or we want a center only. They can get a guy like Elflein who can do both, or they can just pick any of them. And Berger is able to move to a different position if needed. I think that's what you're talking about, where that's somewhat revolutionary in that. It's a little bit easier on the offensive line, whereas guys for example, switching from safety to cornerback would be a lot more difficult. But it's certainly something that I think it's relatively rare to have a guy that can move like that, but also keep the same level of performance on the field.
Absolutely. So let's move on here from that into kind of the discussion topic here, and that's, like I said during the intro, we're going to talk a little bit about keeping players in a Vikings uniform forever. And as I mentioned before, the reason why I bring this up is because I believe it was Purple Post that put up a Twitter poll that basically said which player would you like to see the Vikings retain, and that was out of Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, Danielle Hunter, and Stefon Diggs, because all four of those guys are in theory up for contracts in the coming soon here, and it's going to be difficult after signing Kirk Cousins to bring all of these guys back. Yep. You're going to have to front load some deals, have to kind of manipulate some contracts to make it work perfectly. And on top of that, you're going to have to get guys that are, you're going to have to want to get guys. I'm getting kind of tongue twisting myself here. You're going to have to try to get guys into your room that want to be there despite kind of the dysfunctional nature of an NFL contract, I suppose. And because Kirk Cousins got a fully guaranteed contract, well, that sets the table for a lot of other players to want fully guaranteed contracts as well. So, and the fact of the matter is that, we might not see that come for a while here. I think the only argument for another fully guaranteed contract is probably Aaron Rodgers, right? At this point.
Well, I guess I'm not even 100% sure off the top of my head when the new CBA is, but I would imagine that's going to be a huge point now from the players, is to get fully guaranteed deals like the NBA does. But, it's going to be a stretch for sure to bring back all of these key assets that, have a bunch of potential. Danielle Hunter, I think someone estimated that it'd be $14 million per year or something like that. I think it was someone at Over the Cap said that. Stefon Diggs obviously saw some of the receiver deals that were being agreed upon this offseason that Mike Evans it was
somewhere between 10 and 12 million for Diggs or something like that.
Probably, and then Anthony Barr is going to be at least $12 million a year, and it's going to be a lot. So we can't sit here and say we know for sure that they can afford all this or that all these guys are going to be back.
Right.
So it's going to be, and that's the nature of the business. It's the part of the rules the NFL sets that you can't go over the salary cap, or if you do, there's going to be penalties for it, that type of thing. It's just the way it is. So that causes departures, that causes guys going elsewhere for big money. Jerick McKinnon, my goodness sakes, you can't be upset at Jerick McKinnon for going to San Francisco on the deal he got. That'd be unfair to him. So it's a business. at the same time, it's a game. Like, you have to understand, guys are trying to, pay for.
It's both a business and a game.
They're trying to pay for their life while also playing the game. Yeah.
That dynamic is kind of what, in my head, that's kind of what screws it up, is that everyone looks at football and they're like, oh my God, I'd love to play football, right? Like, I mean, I don't know about you, Drew, because I know you're a golf guy, but like, and I was a baseball guy growing up, so I didn't really have NFL dreams as a lot of people do. Like, I mean, honestly, guys, some of you guys have like your Twitter username as NFL Dreams, and it makes it pretty damn clear that you're trying to get to the NFL. Like, I'm just saying, but like, so I never had that dream, so I can kind of look at it objectively and say, like, okay, these guys are playing a game that, yeah, it certainly sounds like a lot of fun. Like, don't get me wrong. Would I like to play linebacker or safety or whatever, like one of these really fun positions that I guess looks really fun, being like a ball hawk or just, would I like to do that? Yeah. But at the same time, like, I can't. So that kind of
I can't.
that kind of hurts me in that way. But like, my point being here is that we look at football as a game, and it is a game, but it's also a business, and it's also like a huge, like, it's the biggest business, right? Like, it controls everything. Like, some of these.
Well, and the health risks too involved. Like,
right.
Like, that's, I think, the biggest part for why I'm sort of not advocating, but I think that the guaranteed deals are going to be a big deal in the next CBA, that debate, because of the injury risk that players have to deal with on a year-to-year basis. Like, you could, on any play, you could have your entire life changed. I mean, you could be paralyzed. I mean, there's that risk on every single play. So I think we have to keep that in mind too when guys are trying to get more money on their deals. Like, it's not just because they're greedy and they want the most money and everything like that. Like, they're trying to
protect
secure
everyone.
their future. Yeah, secure their future, secure their families. And obviously the best way to do that is to get as much money as you can, probably, or at least do so, or do what is most comfortable for your family and you.
Well, I mean, and here's the thing that I see the most that I think is very unfair to NFL players is that people are always like, well, you already made $1 million. How much more do you need? And okay, so here's my thinking on that. Like, I get it because it shouldn't be about the money. But you also want to have nice things, right? I mean, Eric Thompson makes the joke all the time. Eric Thompson from Daily Norseman makes the joke all the time about how Minnesota Vikings fans can't have nice things, right? Well, Minnesota Vikings players are trying to have nice things, and that's, like, if you want, like, what if your dream is to have a yacht? Like, a yacht costs a lot of money. I'm thinking Step Brothers right now.
It's a nice thing. A yacht is a nice thing.
It's a nice thing.
You have to get a lot of money, or, you have to work to get a yacht.
Yeah, and you don't just have that amount. People don't just have that amount of money, right? Like, it's not easy, right? Like, but I just always think it's so funny because, people are always saying, like, well, if you're making $500K a year, like, you should just be happy. Well, money isn't really happiness, though. I don't think. I mean, I'm broke as hell, and like I'm still pretty happy. Like, I don't think that money is happiness. I think that it's kind of just like a product of like you try to get what you like the most, and if you're simple or if you're frugal like I am, it's a lot easier to be happy with what you got and not what you're trying to get. But then, I mean, who doesn't want like a really nice like pair of pants? I don't know.
Or like shoes or like a new car or pants, I guess, whatever.
I mean, I don't want to drive my 2009 Jeep Grand Cherokee for the rest of my life. That's just fact. But at the same time, it's like you got to understand that like you're playing a game. Everyone's playing the game. Everyone's always playing the game. You just got to figure out how to manipulate the system best for you and your family and the people that you care about. And so, to kind of get back to the actual point of this topic. It's not going to be easy to bring back all of these guys unless all of them are willing to take some level of a pay cut. Now, it's my understanding that guys like Stefon Diggs are very happy and they're, want to be in Minnesota. Same can be said about Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks from what I understand. I don't know where Danielle Hunter is at, but if you're Danielle Hunter and you're 23 years old, I believe he's 23, right?
Yeah.
Sounds right. Why wouldn't you want to cash in? Just one time.
He's going to get multiple big contracts in his career, at least at this rate. I mean, he's only 23. He's due for his first big contract very soon. He's going to get another one when he's 28, 29 in the prime of his career. Like he's going to he has the chance to make some huge money, and you got to respect that, at least that want to go get that. I think that's how we have to treat all these guys the same way. We don't know how other teams evaluate these players. I mean, we didn't think Jerick McKinnon was going to get a $30 million deal in San Francisco, but they like him a lot, and they saw the way he played, and they thought he'd fit in very well in that offense. Like, we don't know if a team's going to see the same thing with Stefon Diggs or Barr, Kendricks, or Hunter. I mean, we don't know that. Right. And so that it might just come down to that simply the Vikings can't afford all these guys because they're just highly coveted around the league.
So here's kind of my proposition then. If guaranteed money becomes a bigger thing, like if let's say, hypothetically speaking, the NFL agrees to give players 100% fully guaranteed contracts moving forward starting in 2020, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay? That gives every player the opportunity to kind of prepare themselves. That means that, to a degree, they're probably protecting their health, right? So is this a good thing for the NFL? I like to think so, because it gives players the opportunity to make the amount of money that they believe they're worth, and they sign that contract, and they basically say, like, there's no way to get out from underneath this now. You're going to have to pay me $20 million over the next 4 years. I don't care how you pay it to me. Like, if you pay me $1 million in the first year of your contract, in the contract, in order to kind of keep the salary cap, like, stable for that season, that still means that you got to pay him, $18 million 1 year in order to get that average annual salary. So that's, to me, is what's very important here, is to look at average annual salary versus what a player is making each year, because you got to understand there's escalators in there, there's bonuses in there, there's things that are triggered by different like Adam Thielen. Didn't Adam Thielen, once he hit 75 catches, he triggered like a $500K bonus or something like that. Like that's the part of the game that fans don't really see, and that's kind of what I try to tell people, is that, like, it's not necessarily it might not ever be about the money for these guys, but it's about what the money says. So, like, if you're a guy who's this big name player, think like Tom Brady or Richard Sherman. Once you've gotten the kind of the glow of being the top cornerback in the league, or the top quarterback in the league, or being the greatest of all time, once you've gotten that, then it becomes about winning only. That's kind of how I feel, at least. Or that's how it would be for me personally. If once I got the money where I felt comfortable, then it's just about winning the Super Bowl. That's the only thing that I would care about. And you saw this happen with Chris Long. I've talked about him doing this a million different times, donating his game checks to charity because he clearly feels very comfortable in the situation. He goes out and wins a Super Bowl. Like, that's a great story that people just don't really talk about, because it's not the gladiator sport that everyone loves. But let's be real here. That charity stuff, like, that's big. It gives you a good appearance. It makes it possible for you to go out and do public speaking appearances. Like, if you're someone who likes to talk, I am someone who likes to talk, so I like to think that I can identify people who also like to talk. Chris Long seems like someone that speaks very well. I mean, if he's donating his game checks, he's kind of, in theory, putting money back into his pocket by doing public speaking appearances, because who wouldn't want Chris Long to come talk for him now? He's a Super Bowl champion. He's got this great reputation. He's funny as hell. I mean, who wouldn't want this guy to be part of, whatever they're trying to build, right? I just think that that's the model that works best for the NFL. It's kind of, in theory, it's like turning the salary cap off to a degree. Because players start caring more about what they have in the moment and what they can have, as opposed to what they're trying to get from a financial standpoint. And that shifts the focus back to the on-field competitive nature, and that's the best product for everyone, period.
Right. I think I'm going to make another comparison to the NBA, because I think there is the potential for kind of a humongous drought for teams if there's only guaranteed contracts. Like, you could have a combination of like one or two devastating injuries to players that could take off, a year or two of their career at the same time, and then you're shoving guaranteed money to them anyway throughout their contract, for example. Whereas, on the other side of it, you might have a player that does take a big pay cut to play with a high contender, and they only benefit more. Whereas they're not going to do the same thing for a lower tiered team and take less of a deal. I'm trying to explain the Golden State Warriors here, because Kevin Durant has a very low contract. Like, I think it's like 2 years, $50 million or something like that. Which is super low compared to what other guys, of his caliber are getting.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously that he did that to help the Warriors and help them afford all their surrounding players. And now they're, probably going to win another title this year. Whereas like the Brooklyn Nets have just been in miserable state now for the last few years, partly because of that big trade where they gave up a bunch of picks to Boston for Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce. But they've had these contracts they've given out that have just not worked out. And they've had injuries, they've had whatever it is to guys, and then they've had to give out guaranteed money for guys sitting on the bench. Like there would be less parity in the NFL if they did this. It would help the teams that are having successful seasons more, I think. But it depends, because the NBA is growing. I mean, they're doing really well right now. Maybe that would help the NFL as a whole. I don't know. I'm no economics major. I'm no business major or anything like that. So I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong. I just think that's something I would look for if the NFL did go to guaranteed deals. But again, at this point, we're not there yet for the Vikings and for these four players that in particular that we're kind of targeting. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's plausible to bring all these guys back. I guess it just depends on what the demands are, what the market's like, and what everybody else around the league feels about these players, because it might be different.
That's important too, because it's not just what the market's like right now. It's more like what the market's like when they're, when the Vikings decide, right? So kind of to wrap this up then, Barr, Kendricks, Hunter, Diggs. Those are the four names that we've kind of used as sort of the piece here. Of those four guys, which one do you think is the most likely to leave via free agency? To leave via free agency for more money, or because he didn't get the contract he wanted, or for whatever million other reasons that a player may or may not want to stay in Minnesota?
This is going to be difficult regardless of who is selected, but I'm going to say Danielle Hunter, because I think he will get a strong offer from another team that the Vikings just won't be able to match. And I also think that I feel like that position is a little bit easier to replace via draft. Defensive end, I think you see a lot of athletic pass rushers in the drafts, more so than maybe that breed of linebacker like Barr and Kendricks. Plus that chemistry, you want to keep those two together as long as you can. But I think a combination of athletic pass rushers in the draft, it seems like there's always a surplus of them each year now. And then the fact that I think Hunter's youth and what he's already shown on the field is going to equal a massive offer from some team out there that needs a pass rusher. So I think he'll go get his money. And then I think Diggs will stay, because I think the Minneapolis Miracle has made him essentially the face of the franchise at this point.
Yeah, I would argue the same.
I think, and then keeping Barr and Kendricks, that chemistry at linebacker and that nickel, where then the nickel package is so key in Zimmer's defense, I think will be important.
Yeah, you did a really nice job there. I have literally nothing to add. I would also say that Hunter is probably the greatest candidate to leave, and for the exact same reason that you said. I mean, he's 23. He's already proven that he can be a productive pass rusher in this league. His potential is out the roof. I saw one contract suggestion, I believe it was from Spot Racker over the cap, like you said before. 5 years, $85 million. I don't think that that's out of play at all. I think that's completely relevant.
With the cap rising up each year. No,
I can see if it's not the Vikings that offer him that, I can see someone offering him that. He could make $100 million contract for all we know. Like, this is a guy.
If he has a next year, which he might now with Sheldon Richardson adding into the picture,
right.
More interior pressure, which should help things out on the outside. Like, it's very possible he has another big year, which will only inflate what he'll be getting in his next big deal.
So what becomes important there for Danielle Hunter when he's making these decisions somewhere down the line is he needs to be conscious of the fact that he is playing with such very talented guys in the interior. Sheldon Richardson being there now, Linval Joseph being there for sure, and we already we don't talk about Linval Joseph enough, and it's probably just because he kind of plays a quiet position, but his value to Danielle Hunter is huge. Like, what he's able to do in the interior, eating up blockers so that Hunter can run his stunts and basically be on an island on the left side of the defensive line, that's huge. So I guess, if Danielle Hunter was listening to this, I would say to him, you're going to get your money for sure, but at the same time, you got to be smart about, just how good do you want to be? If you want to be this guy that breaks the sack record, this is the place to do it, right? This is Minnesota is the spot. So if your goal is to make a crap ton of money, and you know what word I wanted to say there,
if you want to be Ndamukong Suh,
Do you want to be Ndamukong Suh, or do you want to make a ton of money like Jason Pierre-Paul, for example? What's your goal? And if your goal is to be the guy that finally breaks J.J. Watt, or does Watt hold the sack record now? Is he over Strahan?
For a year? I think he got it.
It's straight.
I'm gonna double check now. We're getting off a huge tangent right now. Yeah, it's either Strahan or Watt.
Okay, so regardless, so my point being here is that if he wants to be that guy, Minnesota's the place to be. If he wants to cash in, he could probably still do that in Minnesota, but that's just something to keep in mind moving forward. So from there, let's jump into the questions for the week, and we'll finish up the show there.
Yeah, I'll get those up here. Let's see. Our first one from Eli at Skullseas. He says, do you think the team is actively trying to get younger, or can they just not afford to retain these veteran guys? I think he's referring to some of the players that have left for Carolina. We talk about Jeremiah Searles and Jarius Wright that have, these older veteran guys that just are leaving and not being brought back. Is it in an effort to become younger and maybe planning for the future, or is it just that guys are seeing a better fit somewhere else?
I don't think it's an effort to get younger. I think it's an effort to get better. You look at the guys that have left. Now, Jarius Wright is proven on third down. He can run that crossing route over the middle as well as anyone. Now, does he fit what John DeFilippo likes to do? I don't know. And see, that's kind of where you have to wonder if the Vikings getting rid of Jarius Wright, for example, was a product of what the Vikings are trying to do starting next year. And Jarius Wright basically saying, okay, I know Norv Turner. I've worked with Norv Turner before. I feel comfortable in his situation. Maybe that's just a better overall play for both sides. I don't think this is an effort to get younger. I just think it's an effort to get better and an effort to get the right guys for John DeFilippo to run his offensive system. So Searles, Wright, who else have we lost? Is it other than those two guys? Berger to retirement. You lost Tom Johnson and Shamar Stefan to Seattle on defense.
Yep.
I really don't think that this is an effort to get younger. I think this is an effort to just get the best guys in the room, and the Vikings have that ability right now based off of their reputation and based off of what they can bring in right now.
Yeah, I would mostly agree with that, because I think if the Vikings were trying to get younger, I think they would have already gotten rid of Brian Robinson, and they have not done that yet. So, and if I don't know if they're going to or not, but I think that would be an indicator for me, like kind of a final indicator of, okay, this team's for sure trying to plan for the future, make sure that if 2018 isn't a Super Bowl year, that they still can be competitive afterwards. I think Brian Robinson, or getting rid of him, would be kind of that indicator, but they haven't done that yet. So I'm going to say no to that. They're getting younger, but there's kind of a trend there that they're trying to maybe they see these young guys on the roster now, like at defensive tackle, Jaleel Johnson, didn't get a whole lot of run last year. Tayshaun Bauer, some of these guys, they're getting rid of these, Tom Johnson, Shamar Stefan are leaving. Maybe they see potential in those guys. They just want them to get more of a chance. Or at receiver, Stacey Coley and Caleb Jones, like there's potential there, and they just didn't get to show it last year. And maybe getting rid of Jarius Wright or not being too aggressive and bringing him back is a way to get those guys more exposure. So we'll move on here to.
That was really good.
Yeah, I know it was. A similar question here from Robert Gardner at Gardner40. Robert says, which of our free agent losses will we miss the most? He said he's thinking Jarius Wright.
I'm thinking Jarius Wright as well. I would say Jarius Wright or Tom Johnson. Tom Johnson is kind of not as safe of a pick, I suppose, simply because he's older, he's a veteran, and you don't really. I believe he's 30 something now. You start to see that tail off come at that point in their career. So I think it's safer to say Jarius Wright. I'll say Jarius Wright and Tom Johnson for one for each side of the ball.
Yeah, I agree, because I think it's on one hand it's tough to lose Tom Johnson, Shamar Stefan, that depth in the interior line, but they did get Sheldon Richardson out of it. Right. A proven Pro Bowl player. So I think finding that slot reliable player on third down like Jarius Wright is going to be difficult. And maybe it's on the roster now, maybe it's someone else they bring in, but they have to replace that, and I think that's the biggest thing that they've lost so far. So we'll move on to Luke Regions at Luke_Right. It's either Rightgens or Regions. I'm probably saying that wrong. What is the Vikings' biggest need besides offensive line? He has either defensive line or cornerback. Do you agree with those needs? Do you have anything else to add?
Defensive line, I would say, probably is fixed now with the Sheldon Richardson signing. You do need to add some depth there, depending on how you feel about Jaleel Johnson, I think. I think that linebacker is probably an issue still. You love Barr and Kendricks in that nickel situation, but I believe Emmanuel Lemur is still a free agent, or he just signed somewhere else.
He signed with Oakland, I think.
Is it Oakland?
I think he signed with Oakland.
Okay, so I would say linebacker depth and cornerback depth, depending on what happens with Terrence Newman, are probably the two biggest needs for me.
Right. I mean, I think at this point now you're just adding depth to places, right? Like, I mean, the cornerback, I mean, the defensive back starters, there's no problem. Really, on the entire roster, there's no problems with the starters.
Right.
I mean, if you want to argue offensive line maybe has one or two spots, but overall, the starters aren't the problem. It's just adding some depth and getting guys that, have some experience, or guys that will take advantage of their experience in the preseason. But yeah, I would add, I think, defensive line and cornerback, getting those places depth. I think you can never have enough depth on cornerback. I think that's one of those positions where if you're not careful there, you can get exposed pretty easily. So I think cornerback is for sure one of them. I'd add defensive line. I could also throw in receiver again, just because Jarius Wright's gone, and you still are very uncertain about Laquan Treadwell. So lastly here, this will be kind of a preface into our future shows here about the NFL draft. Joe Schneider at Joe Schmo 84 asked, which offensive lineman would you prefer if both Nelson and Wynn are gone at guard, and McGlinchey and Williams are off the board at offensive tackle? Do you reach for offensive tackle with Colton Miller, or go Will Hernandez or Billy Price? So I'll be honest right here that I have not done a ton of draft. So I know you've done a little bit more than I have. I don't know if you have a thought here on this, but
okay. So I watched Will Hernandez yesterday. I have a bit of a funny story. So for some of you that aren't on Twitter, I made a mistake of riling up Oklahoma Twitter yesterday by getting the name of by getting the name of one of their safeties wrong, which was hilarious, and I think they're super funny. So,
because Andy Carlson does this when he calls Sam Bradford a Heisman runner-up, and that did not please the Oklahoma fans. So I know he had a very interesting experience with them a few months ago.
It's pretty. I still think it's funny. I want to know how they find me. That's like the number one thing. Like, do they just search? Like, do some of these hardcore Oklahoma fans just search the word Oklahoma and then find someone that's wrong and just berate them until they say
that's how Gerald Hodges got me on Twitter. He just searched his own name. So
I love it. I honestly, dude, like, I'm fine with that. I search people on Twitter. That's how you find out a bunch of news and stuff. If you want to learn more about your team, that's probably the best. Search Vikings on Twitter, and I guarantee you'll see a bunch of like tweets and stuff where you can fight with people if you want. That's Twitter.
If that's your thing,
if that's your thing, you go ahead and do that. I'm going to stay in my lane, but I am getting off topic here. To get to the point is I liked Will Hernandez quite a bit. I don't know a whole lot about Colton Miller, but Will Hernandez looks like one hell of a run blocker. And if I'm trying to spring Dalvin Cook, if that's kind of the goal of my offense, is to spring Dalvin Cook and then also be able to hit you with some slants and some fades and I guess some shorter to intermediate routes with Thielen and Diggs, I'm going to get a mauling run blocker at guard, and I would say Will Hernandez is a phenomenal choice there. But I do really like Billy Price. I mean, there's nothing not to like about him besides that, was it a pec injury, something like that? Whatever happened there with him is not good from a health standpoint, but I like him. I like his film a lot as well.
Yeah, I mean, here's I don't have, I guess, an issue with this whole thing, but I'm still curious about Mike Remmers switching to guard, because I think he's better suited at tackle. So if it were me running things, and again, I'm not for a reason, but if it was me, I would probably keep Remmers outside and then go guard with this pick. And then I think, given the way Billy Price's stock has kind of fallen, at least it's been just due to the injury and stuff, I think the Vikings could even trade back a little bit and then grab Price earlier in the second round, maybe, or middle of the second round. But again, I know Spielman likes his fifth-year option. But I like Price just because of the chemistry he and Elflein have. I think that could be huge for kind of bringing some continuity finally to the offensive line. We saw a little bit of it last year. I think adding him in there would be huge. So I'm a big Billy Price fan right now. But, I mean, nothing against Colton Miller, because the guy, clearly he can play tackle. He's 6'9". He's a big dude. It's not like I would be against that, especially if Remmers does stay in at guard. But I think bringing in Billy Price is probably the best move there. So that's my answer, and that would be the last of our questions for the show.
Excellent. All right, folks. Well, thanks as always for all the questions you asked, and We will be back later on this week. We're a little late today. That's on me. Drew and I had a bit of a scheduling mix-up, as we have a tendency to do every now and then. So the show's up a little bit late today, but we'll be back again on Friday. So our plan is to record on Thursday. So again, if you're a subscriber, you'll be able to get the show a little bit early if you want. And if you don't, as always, I don't care. That's fine with me. We'll be up on Friday for sure. Don't know what we're going to be talking about just yet. We have kind of our plan moving forward here is just to have I have a list of topics, and I sent them to Drew the other day, and we're basically just adding to those topics as I see stuff pop up. So next time we might be talking a little bit more about the catch rule, which I saw that the CBA is they're officially releasing a lot of different information on kind of the upgrades to that. So that's something that could come up. Most important Vikings ranked. I've done this. I've done this kind of this thing with people on Twitter where like you try to figure out like if the Vikings were to do a redraft, which would be the top 5, in what order would they go in? So maybe that's something we'll talk about. And then Sharif Floyd's Instagram, that's something we didn't get to today. And something that we'll probably have to talk about at some point here. So those are some topics to look forward to in the future. Also, we'll be doing more draft work, and we'll have more stuff up on guys like Billy Price, Isaiah Wynn, James Daniels is from Iowa, is a guy that I've been looking at lately. I think is a very cool player. And then Quentin Nelson, of course. So we'll talk more about all that and plenty more on the upcoming shows here. But until then, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you later on this week.